Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month, we will put the election campaign season in a larger perspective. We care about issues that should be addressed by politicians who run for office, but unfortunately nowadays, campaigns are conducted in ways that de-emphasize real issues, and the news media tend to focus on trivial fluff and on the horse race aspect of campaigns, instead of looking at what the real issues are and informing the voters so we can make informed choices. This month's Olympia FOR TV program will examine how the news media function overall, and especially during the campaign season, and how we the people can make elections meaningful again, and how we the people can productively work on issues without being marginalized by the election campaign process that seems to preoccupy everybody's attention. People complained about politicians, but if we want to solve the world's problems and our nation's problems and our community problems, we need to reform how we conduct elections. And we need to change how the news media cover election campaigns. And we need to change how the media function in our society overall if we're going to have an informed democracy. And we need to make sure that everybody can focus on real issues without the typical distractions. So this is a pretty big agenda, and we'll cover a lot of ground during this hour. We have a great guest who's well respected in our local community. Kim Dobson is known and respected for his wide-ranging knowledge of a lot of issues, from the very local to the very national and global. And he also hosts the Parallel University program on Chaos Radio, Chaos 89.3 FM in Olympia. And it runs on Thursdays at noon on FM 89.3 in Olympia. Good to have you here, Kim. This will be fun.
Thank you so much, Glenn.
And I want to welcome you also to the Olympia FOR Steering Committee. The Olympia FOR just recently elected you to join the steering committee, and it's great to have you there. Everybody was tickled about the prospect that you might be joining us, and it was unanimous in welcoming you to the group.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So we'll be covering a lot of concerns during this hour, and I want to start by understanding the mainstream media. We're just saturated with mainstream media. Folks don't as much get a chance to hear alternative media, but we'll be talking about that as well. But you know, a vigorous democracy requires a lot of media and a lot of different viewpoints of media and a lot of different sources of information. I wonder, can you tell us something about who owns and controls the media, the mainstream media in this country?
The mainstream media is mostly owned by wealthy corporations who have their commercial interests in mind above the public interest. It seems as if we are dominated by very large corporations who have those interests, and including the very large NBC, who is part of this whole military-industrial complex that we were warned about so long ago.
They're owned by General Electric,
exactly.
weapons manufacturer.
Weapons manufacturer.
Yeah.
So that's, and on the other end we have Rupert Murdoch on Fox News, who's an Australian investor and newsprint man and media man.
Yeah, and he owns print media as well. He just bought the Wall Street Journal as well as the Fox thing, and so we have a lot of the same corporations that own broadcast media and print media.
Indeed, and the FCC has been working on...
The Federal Communications Commission, the federal agency that regulates broadcast,
has been relaxing the media ownership rules, which is causing a further consolidation of media ownership. And now I'm not sure if the rules have been changed yet, but they're going to allow a television station to own also a major print media in the same city, which wasn't allowed before.
Right. And there also used to be prohibitions against how many
stations
you can have.
Yeah, in a certain
locations
market.
And,
Exactly.
And now, so it's getting to be more consolidated, as you said, and so people in some given city or small town or whatever may not have a diversity of ownership. It's moving to the point where everybody who's communicating news to you is owned by the same company. I mean, it's that direction.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost as if in the old days in the West, and especially mining towns, where the company printed the local newspaper.
Yeah.
They owned the newspaper, and they also owned access to all other media and the telegraph company.
And the company store and everything else.
Exactly.
Yeah. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, used to have what was called the Fairness Doctrine. Can you tell us what that was and what happened to it?
The Fairness Doctrine was really all about preserving public access to media and preserving equal access for opposing points of view. And in the old days, stations had to offer equal time for opposing points of view on issues. And now the rules were relaxed so that was not a problem for commercial media. Although in public affairs, in community media, it is somewhat different, because under the rules of Federal Communications Act, Federal Communications Commission rules, when we have candidates on the air, we offer time to all of the candidates.
Now that's on public, on community like Chaos Radio.
But those are our rules.
Yeah.
But commercial media does not have to follow those rules.
Because you always have a disclaimer. I listen to your program, if I possibly can, on Thursdays at noon, and you always have the disclaimer that this isn't official stuff. And if you have a different point of view, that's okay. Call in and you'll make space for it.
Exactly. We offer time.
Yeah.
And the interesting part of the rules are that we offer time to all the candidates, but if they don't respond within a week, we're not required to offer them time again. So they have a window of opportunity, and those are the rules. And many times candidates will not respond if they feel as if Evergreen's community radio station wouldn't be a good forum for them. So oftentimes we have Republican candidates refusing to come on the air.
But
they feel like they're offered, certainly. Yeah, we offer them time.
How could you summarize how mainstream news media, and I'm thinking of radio and TV and newspapers and magazines, just mainstream media all over the place, how they see the world? Because it would seem like if they're presenting news, and you might be, one of the big TV networks, or you might be Time magazine or something, how they see the world would seem to be influencing how they report. And I'm wondering how do mainstream news media see the world, and what happens then in how they report news, and what news they choose to report for that matter, and what news they choose to ignore. Can you address that somehow?
That's a big question.
Yeah. I didn't have a good way of breaking it down, so that's...
Yeah. I guess it would be easy to look at, most easy to look at interests in wartime, because many stories are not valuable to mainstream media corporations if they point to a certain vested interest that they may have in one of their manufacturing concerns in another related if they have investments in military contracting or supply for the military, they're not going to want to point out deficiencies in those private contractors that are operating. They're not going to want to pick up those stories so readily, especially if it points back to some sort of malfeasance. So that story won't be covered.
Right.
So that's the problem of interlocking ownerships and corporations having their hands in a lot of different ownerships.
I'm thinking also of just the fact that these are very large corporations owned in capitalistic ways, and so that would reflect just inherently how they see things, as opposed to, say, a TV station that was owned by working class people who are making minimum wage and above, a little bit above. I mean, you don't have any major metropolitan TV stations owned by, you know, gas station attendants and retail clerks and LPNs and people doing real ordinary work, construction workers and things.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason for that. It costs millions of dollars to get on ground, and TCTV is one of those few areas where local citizenry can produce their own programs and get the grassroots involved in activism on television and air the issues that aren't being aired on mainstream media.
Yeah, well, the folks at TCTV have this very profound respect for the First Amendment and for a rich democracy that has lots of voices participating. And it's rare. It is the anomaly compared to the rest of what you see on TV or hear on the radio or whatever.
Yeah, and those they call them PEG requirements for local cable providers. We could talk about Comcast's responsibilities to provide TCTV with the space to do this production.
My understanding is there's a federal requirement that the folks here invoked because the cable TV provider, which now is Comcast and it used to be somebody else, there's a federal requirement that says, okay, if you're going to get a monopoly to put your TV cable through a community, you have an obligation to that community to provide funding, and so some important part of the funding of TCTV comes from that as a condition of doing business in this community as a monopoly. I want to mention something else also about the connection. Advertisers, TCTV is nonprofit, is run by volunteers largely. I mean, they have a few paid staff, but the programming is essentially done by volunteers. And most mainstream TV and radio and newspapers and magazines are all relying on advertising income. And it has seemed, based on things I understand of how the news gets covered and how the news doesn't get covered and which news doesn't get covered, and what the angle is, that you don't want to offend your major advertisers. So,
True.
Newspapers that rely on advertising from grocery stores and real estate interests, for example, which provide substantial revenue and other retail stores too, those folks are not going to get the kind of critical examination that some place that does not advertise would get, such as, for example, the Evergreen State College is in the local press is being repeatedly criticized and often unfairly.
Sure.
And they don't advertise, but they don't really attack the real estate industry or grocery stores or things.
Yeah, that is a real interesting part, and that connection can be seen. And I see a shift to free and public advertising, such as Craigslist. If you go down and you look at the size of the classifieds.
It's a website where people can post things for sale and
for free,
job openings, and
it's a very egalitarian site. But what's going on is locally the Olympian is losing a lot of ad revenue to Craigslist and other free posting areas on the internet, and they're having to make up that ad revenue by allowing car dealerships and real estate, interests to dominate the classified sections.
Well, I was really disappointed that they used to run a whole page inside their TV section listing the TCTV schedule for a week, the schedule for this station, and they quit doing that. I guess they're not making money on it, so.
Exactly.
So
the bottom line is pretty tight.
Yeah. So, based on the concerns you've raised about concentration of media ownership in fewer hands, and then the mainstream media's biases about things, what are the implications then for our society and for democracy? And maybe it's obvious.
Well, they're pretty scary, actually, because, George Orwell warned us a long time ago about such things. And Aldous Huxley.
Well, Orwell, he had a background in journalism, as I recall.
And some of those things are scarily coming to be true. The Ministry of Truth,
Yeah.
Ministry of Peace, you know, seem to be. Wouldn't it be nice if we had one?
Yeah, but it's flopped, so that
It's
the words mean
flip-flopped.
the opposite. They mean
Exactly.
the opposite of what. Well, we have the Department of Defense. We used to have the Department of War until about 1947, and then they changed the name to Department of Defense. And since then, we've had nothing but war.
Oh, right. Exactly.
So it's like, whoa.
Yeah. You know, it is scary that, and now with the advent of wiretapping and the erosion of civil liberties in the last 8 years, we really do have a case of Big Brother watching
Oh,
us.
yeah. They're reading everything you email
Yeah.
I mean, they screen these things with the National Security Agency that does this massive, this total information awareness program that got shut down because the public found out about it and pressure went on, but it's back in other ways.
It's
but
back
not
in
that
other
name.
ways.
Yeah.
Giant server farms,
Yeah.
AT&T,
Yeah.
one of their workers came forward telling how they were ordered to put in this giant server farm
Yeah.
to monitor all internet traffic in one of their main trunks down in San Francisco.
Yeah.
It's going on in all major cities.
Right.
This is the warrantless wiretapping.
Yeah, yeah, which Congress seems pretty much indifferent to. I mean, it's like, sure, George, anything you want.
Right.
Don't bother us, just do as you please. Who are we to second guess what you want to do? Okay.
Yeah, so we're moving right along.
Yes. So when we look at what happens then for election campaigns and electoral processes and democracy versus the issues that should be covered, what are these implications?
Well, it's interesting that mentioning when you look at the election coverage for the presidential candidates specifically, I don't know if it's time for these figures.
Go ahead. Go for it. People can see how well we've prepared for this program by having people with actual eyeglasses and figures to read.
This is now we do want to plug fair.org a little bit here.
Yeah, it's Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, a wonderful organization we'll mention later on in the program.
This is they did a study of ABC, CBS, NBC nightly newscasts, and from December 26th, 07 to February 5th, 08. The frame and the frame of all of these various news stories, it was put into categories. Campaign analysis and strategy was 65% of the stories.
And that's basically the horse race aspect, which is in the title of this program that we're doing, is issues, not horse races, and we're getting as horse
Right,
races.
you know, how well the campaign is doing. And news was about 12%. Polls and voter mood was about 11%. Human interest, local color was 6%. Issues was an abysmal 5%.
Right.
Immediate advertising was 1%. And biography was 1/3%.
Yeah. So, and as people reflect back on what we've been seeing during, especially the presidential campaigns, but others as well, we see this in the race for governor and other things where so much of it is being reported on as what's the polling data? What are they doing in their campaign to respond to somebody's bad-mouthing them about something, and reporting the bad-mouthing rumors and what you're wearing and how your voice sounds and whether people who carry a lunchbox to work are going to like the way you come across when you visit a local diner to connect with the voters in the primary state, and all this kind of BS. And nothing is about saying, okay, now in depth, really, how are you going to deal with this issue? what exactly is your position? And it's all this other fluff. Are you wearing a flag lapel pin? And it's like, what? Now, come on, we got to make an informed choice. And it's bizarre. So to see those figures it really confirms what has been so irritating to me, at least, and other people I've talked with in preparation for this program.
Yeah, it's very disappointing. The media is really falling down in actually presenting the issues. And in candidates' debates, they're so scripted, and each party goes through. This is a little bit off topic, but it's the same thing. They don't talk about issues as much as they have criticism for each other in their debates.
Yeah.
So and it's all scripted. There's never an open debate when they manage these things.
Right. Yeah, it all shies away from an actual lifting out of the issues. It's this dance that goes on that's pretty meaningless. The news media really did a terrible job, in my humble opinion, of covering candidates, presidential candidates, who were across the whole spectrum. They did very early on in the campaign season. The news media said, okay, this is a candidate that's doing a lot of polling, getting a lot of big polling numbers, so we'll cover this candidate, and we'll ignore the others. And the others needed visibility, and many of the ones that were not getting much visibility were actually raising substantive issues that needed to be engaged, and that's across the spectrum. I mean, Dennis Kucinich, for example, who was very progressive, was raising issues. Ron Paul, who's at the other end of the spectrum, as a very conservative, even libertarian Republican, was raising issues. The news media did not want to talk to the people or cover the people who raised substantive issues, and it was all this business in the middle about what do we think about the pastor of the church that you attend, or the former pastor, or the, all this people you knew years ago.
But
when the NBC TV was having a debate in Los Angeles, and they said, okay, here are the criteria for getting in to the debate for us to cover you, and Dennis Kucinich met the criteria, and they said, no, but we don't want you. Tell us the rest of that story. So he was excluded from the debate, but tell us the rest of that, what happened as a result with alternative media.
All right. Well, the next day, Democracy Now!'s Amy Goodman invited Dennis Kucinich to have his, I think he took the better part of the hour that morning, to where they played back the discussion of the debate, and they stopped the tape, and then he was allowed to add his viewpoints and make his point about what the other candidates were saying. And so he got his day in the media regardless of what NBC thought.
Yeah, but it was in the alternative media, which not as many people watch or listen to as listen to NBC, but it shows the value of alternative media, and Democracy Now! Actually does air on TCTV, and it also airs on Chaos. On Chaos, it airs weekdays at 9 a.m., Monday through Friday. It's amazingly good stuff. It's real stuff. It's what journalism should be, and people rely on it.
One of the interesting things about the Pacifica Network, which Amy Goodman is a part of in WBAI, is the original station in Berkeley, KPFA, was founded by a World War II pacifist.
Right, a conscientious objector or a resistor. I forget which he was.
Well, I think he was both.
He may have been both. Yeah.
And true to form, they have continued to provide a peaceful alternative and a critique of the military-industrial complex.
One of the things that, I'm so annoyed by the mainstream media's trivialization of democracy that CNN, in their coverage of the presidential election, had for quite some time, their screen image was a football field. They'd show like a drawing of a football field, and then the headline said, Campaign Bowl 2008, as if the presidential election for the United States of America was nothing more than just a game. And it was just a terrible trivialization. And they did the same BS as the mainstream networks, even though CNN is supposed to have a reputation for doing news, but they're doing the same thing. It's just shameful.
Well, granted,
in my humble opinion,
things have changed since then, and now Keith Olbermann has actually come out being quite critical of the Bush administration, and he's freely critical and has some very good guests now.
Okay.
But seeing as how Mr. Bush's approval rating has dropped down to about 25%, I guess he feels free to without losing his job.
Right. I want to show something as we're kind of playing with what goes on in the process of democracy. I want to just illustrate something here with there is really quite a spectrum of political belief, and I'll just kind of point here. There's sort of a bell curve, a lot of folks in the middle, but there are some folks at the very progressive end and some that are in the liberal spot, a lot of moderate folks, and a fair number of conservatives, and it trails off toward the right wing. And what happens is, if we were to have, and we'll talk some more about political parties and constituencies a bit in just a moment. We're getting into that.
Sure.
But the point is, if there are people at all places along the spectrum, you'd think that you'd want to have parties that represent them. But we have this two-party system, and people have the notion that the two-party system equals democracy, even though other countries have lots of parties and lots more vibrant discussion of issues. But so you have, for example, suppose you were to figure, well, you got the Democrats have the left half and the Republicans have the right half. But what happens is the socialists and the Greens and others that may be at the more progressive end get disenfranchised, and because the Democrats want to crowd in toward the middle, the Republicans want to crowd in toward the middle, and they disenfranchise the libertarians and the other people at the far right side. But during the primary season, you'll have candidates, like the primary presidential, when you have a lot of candidates, you'll have a number of people at various places along. The news media ignore the sides, and they look pretty much at the ones that it says are the front runners. Once the campaign for the primary is over and they end up with a nominee for each party, they tend to crowd in toward the middle to get this big lump of moderate voters. And even if you have somebody who's liberal going into it, they crowd to the middle. And even if you have somebody who's very conservative, they try to portray themselves as more moderate. Certainly McCain, who has a very, very right-wing voting record, tries to portray himself as a maverick, as a moderate, as a reasonable person. And likewise, Obama is kind of running away from his more liberal things toward very centrist positions. And we're seeing this now, that the thing.
Yeah, there's some very good articles right now.
And so that's what happens. And it leaves these people on the side really quite disenfranchised. And then what also happens is, over the years, the Republican Party has been moving this way, and the Democratic Party has been sort of chasing after them, trying to catch that mound. And that further leaves people on the more left side disenfranchised. So
yeah,
it's an interesting process, and if you want a vibrant democracy, we have this notion that a two-party system is real democracy, but European nations have a wider range and a parliamentary system. So I wonder if you can talk about some of the potential of, or some of how things work when you have more parties. How is that more democratic, and what are the things you can do with multiple parties that we can't with only two?
Well, I can think of most immediately the German system, because in the past 25 years, the Green Party has shown great strengths there. And while they're not quite as strong as they used to be, they have implemented a lot of changes in mandating renewable energy resources. When they ask for a new coal power plant, a percentage of that has to be wind power and solar power. A very large percent of whatever happens and is agreed upon, it's mandated. So it's not like 1% like we have in this country of wind power that we have going on supplying our energy needs. It's more like 20. And these are some of the changes that they've made through their parliamentary system. And I think I'm not an expert at this, but I do know it's called a proportional representation. And it reminds me of the instant runoff voting. They don't X out a candidate simply because they received a lesser amount of votes. They have equal representation in the parliament.
So what will happen in a parliamentary system where you have a number of parties, if you have proportional representation, then suppose 5% of the votes go to the Libertarians. Libertarians then get 5% of the seats in Parliament. If you get 5% or 10% for the Greens, they get that percentage in the Parliament, and so forth. And you might have, then thinking back to that graph I showed, all the different spots on the spectrum are represented, and then you have a stake in the system. Part of that government is yours if you're on the Labor Party or the Women's Party or the whatever the party. I mean, it doesn't have to be just a linear thing, but you can be representing an interest group, and so then you have a stake in the system, and then to put together a governing coalition, you want to get a majority of parliamentary seats, so several parties will team up to form a majority, but each party has its say, and if it drifts away from where you're coming from, you pull out of the coalition, and then the government has to have a new election maybe, or some new thing to pull it together.
Or they form new coalitions with different party members.
Yeah. So what happens then is it seems as though that more closely represents the interests of the population, whereas here 49% of the people can be disenfranchised and you got nothing. And then you mentioned the proportional representation, that was that, and then you mentioned the instant runoff voting where, you know, here we have this notion of the lesser of two evils, you know, and if I vote, and so people are afraid to vote for the person who represents their libertarian ideas or their green ideas or their women's party ideas or whatever. You're afraid to vote for that minority party because you're going to lose, and people say you're throwing away your vote.
Right,
or
you're a spoiler.
A spoiler, or that kind of stuff. And what this lets you do is instant runoff voting, which is also called ranked choice voting, lets you rank your candidates in preference. So I might want to vote first for the Women's Party candidate, and if that candidate doesn't have a majority, my second choice one is counted instead of my first, and so it just recalculates the votes until, and each time the bottom ranking, if the Women's Party candidate comes in last, then the votes for that candidate would just get reallocated to their second choices and so you end up with somebody who actually wins as a majority, rather than what happens here where people are told that they're wasting their vote or they're being a spoiler.
Yeah, a point in case would be the Florida election between George Bush and Al Gore. In that case, Nader's votes, if we had instant runoff voting and actual representation beyond the Electoral College, if we actually had our votes being counted by numbers of votes, if you had picked Nader as your first choice and your second choice was Gore, then your vote would have gone to Gore.
Right.
And in that election, that would have pushed Al Gore over the edge, making him president.
Yeah.
And I think this scares a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because party affiliations are very afraid of these sorts of, you know, merging of parties. And
so the big parties like the way it is because they can marginalize and trivialize and disempower all the other viewpoints except these two mainstream ones that sort of have this, it's like a shared monopoly. They kind of, you know, we have a bipartisan foreign policy here. It doesn't matter a whole lot which party gets elected because we're still going to have a foreign policy that's based on military violence, threats of military violence used to further U.S. empire for business interests, and that's been continuous all the way back since World War II, no matter which party has been in the White House and no matter which party has run Congress. There will be differences over which country we're invading or bombing or something.
Right, whether or not we have a direct invasion force or whether we just have a bombing campaign.
Yeah, or fund like the Contras in Nicaragua, where we fund terrorists and death squads and which side they're on and stuff. But it's the same premise is the same. It's a policy of empire, and that's bipartisan. And likewise, is bipartisan on quite a lot of things. And it's just a matter of tweaking how to do it. But we don't have a real debate about should we have a foreign policy, a foreign policy of empire or not. When I was in college, quite a number of years ago, my best friend said, they let us decide whether to smoke a Winston or a Marlboro, but they don't let us vote and decide about whether to go to war or not. This was during the Vietnam War.
Right.
And there's all this advertising about this cigarette brand versus that, or this car versus that car, or whatever, stuff to buy, but you never get a chance to vote on should we go to war or not. The big issues.
Yeah, Ralph Nader calls that collusion of the Democratic and Republican Party the duopoly.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you've explained.
Yeah. There's another concern I know that you had about public financing of elections, another reform if we want to have a real democracy, to get big money out. And we did a TV program on this program.
Yeah, and actually there's some very good campaigns going on right now for public financing, publicly owned elections.
Yeah, that's what they're calling it, voter-owned elections.
Voter-owned elections.
Yes, yeah.
Very excellent concept.
Yeah, people from Washington State here had gotten the state legislature to change the law to allow municipalities, local governments, to provide public funding if the local government were to adopt such a thing. So it was permissive. It was allowing them to do it. And then now there's an effort for people in Seattle, Tacoma, and Olympia who are trying to get their own cities. They're just starting to gear up as we're taping this program to work with people in the city government to see about doing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it would take out a lot of the now public financing of campaigns. So that would mean equal amounts of money would be given to each candidate regardless of party affiliation.
Right, and as long as you've been able to demonstrate that you have enough voter support through a process, and I don't know exactly how they would implement it. I mean, they haven't drafted the municipal resolutions yet, but the way it works in Maine and Arizona, where they have this at the state level, is you have to get a certain number of signatures showing that you're a credible candidate, and you have to get donations of at least $5 or $10 from some certain large number of people to show that you're not just some off-the-wall flake, and then you can qualify for public financing. And it makes a big difference to the voters, as they've found in those states, whether you're running as a clean money campaign or whether your campaign is being funded by the special interests, the pharmaceutical industry or the real estate developers or whatever the special interests are. And they've found that candidates running with public money instead of special interest money are really getting elected, and the vast majority of people now in those legislatures have come into office with that, and they represent the real people. And then that means that you can serve the people and not spend all your time doing more fundraising, because the whole thing costs in Washington State. It would be about $4 a person, is what they've calculated.
It's a bargain.
And the local government about $4 a person, and you get rid of that corrupting influence.
Exactly. The Public Disclosure Commission has somewhat shed a little sunshine on where money comes from in campaigns. Candidates are required to report where their income for their campaign comes from.
And that came in by state initiative. It was in 1974, I think, is when that came in, by initiative of the people.
Yeah, a very important change, but it's not enough. We really do need these publicly financed campaigns. Interesting case in point, in the last election between Dino Rossi and Christine Gregoire for governor of Washington, we could see where the campaign money was coming from. Different special interests, Christine's money came from unions and teachers and, rank and file people, blue-collar state workers, environmentalists. Dino's money came from master builders of Washington, the building industry, the Farm Bureau, the insurance industry, and the real estate industry. So, this is we get the government we pay for.
So I mean, there are a lot of ways to have a more vibrant democracy through the electoral process, and all those things need to be reformed. We've done, as I mentioned, TV programs on that. We've done a TV program here on proportional representation, or IRV, on the instant runoff voting, and some other things. I want to move beyond that and take this thing, and rotate it a bit and say that there's a way in which elections are inadequate to fix what really ails us at a more profound level. People think about democracy in terms of voting and elections, but elections occur, maybe 3 times a year or something. And, for the school levy and this and the primary and the general election or whatever, you get about 3 elections a year out of 365 or 366 days. So that's like 1% of the days we actually vote. And the other 99% of the days, we can practice democracy by what we do, by getting ourselves well informed about the issues from independent sources, not just the mainstream media, and by organizing at the grassroots to work with people to say, look, let's organize and represent the public interest and do the things that we want to have done. Because the real problems that ail us are not going to be fixed by an electoral process where 2 big parties crowd into the middle and they're both funded by a variety of special interests. So people, poll after poll shows that American people saying our country is headed in the wrong direction, and the rate of those answers has been going up in recent years. More and more and more people are saying we're headed in the wrong direction, and partly it's because we have an electoral process that's governed by special interests, has only 2 parties, is not taking on the reforms that it needs, and partly because ordinary grassroots people assume that that's going to take the problem and fix the problem, and all we have to do is substitute this person instead of that one. What we really need is to practice democracy by organizing at the grassroots. So that's my thing that I'm most eager for is whether, no matter what the issue is, whether it's on foreign policy or economics or single-payer health care, universal for everybody, or protecting the waterfront views in Olympia, or on every issue, it's ordinary people that change things and make it work. So I want to hear from you. That was my rant.
That was your rant.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I think that, indeed, grassroots campaigns have always changed anything that's ever been done good in this country. We've got the labor movements. We escaped the 60-hour work week. We have the 40-hour work week. We have, the 8-hour day, and unions have lost a lot of power in recent years because of, number one, Taft-Hartley prevented union organizing on workspaces, and so that's a side issue. But grassroots organizing has always made all the big changes that we have in our communities.
Yeah, the civil rights movement in the South, they didn't vote that in. The people organized and they did the grassroots action and won over the nation's conscience to realize, hey, that segregation's got to stop, that abuse has got to stop. We got to fix things. But it wasn't by winning elections. In fact, the black people couldn't even vote, but they used other methods and ways that were much more democratic with a small d. And whenever I talk about democratic, I mean small d. I'm not referring to a party. And yet the mainstream feel in this country is that these kinds of actions are somehow marginal. They're on the periphery. Really, that's at the core of what democracy is about, is people organizing grassroots with other people to make the change. Women's right to vote. Women couldn't vote, so they couldn't vote in the change, but the women were organizing and agitating. They spent 70 years at it, from about 1850 to about 1920. you know.
That
And
was too long in coming.
Gandhi didn't win any elections. Martin Luther King didn't win any elections. I mean, they weren't out there in the electoral sphere. They were organizing. And if we look at the changes that we need to make in our society, that's what we need to be doing.
Well, one further connection on that, you know, if we could actually connect our campaigns with these grassroots initiative functions that citizens groups on a grassroots level are doing in their own communities, if candidates could come on board to take care of, you know, citizens' issues and actually validate the citizenry's complaints about an issue and use that as part of their campaign and sort of merge the two, the grassroots organizing and the candidate. How would that be? I mean, that would seem to be a good marriage.
Well, it's got to start with the people and to resist the temptation to get co-opted, because there have been things where people have been pushing on something and the politicians say, well, we'll give you part of it, and people fall for it, and then the organizing collapses because they got a small victory rather than persist with the rest of the agenda.
And there's nothing going to guarantee that the candidate will stick by their word after they're elected.
Yeah, the thing is to organize in advance, and then no matter who wins, we've been educating people on the issue, and we've made progress. We've been building a large majority that wants this change. Then whether the halfway decent or pretty good candidate wins and goes with it, we've made progress. If the not very good candidate wins, we've still got our organizing that we've done on the issue, because we haven't fallen into the trap of settling for less than what we really want in a candidate. So, I mean, the issue-based organizing seems like a win-win either way. We're running a bit tight on time. I want to flow back further into the kinds of things that we were talking about at the beginning on the media, and kind of bring the conversation around. How could we apply this kind of democratic, again, small d, sense that we're talking about to our concerns with the media? What would be the implications about reforming the media or choosing media we want if ordinary people were to empower themselves and organize at the grassroots? How might we feed that into issues that relate to the media?
You're going to have to reframe that question.
Okay, all right. We've talked some about real democracy, grassroots stuff, bottom up. If ordinary people empower ourselves, and if we do grassroots organizing on important issues, what if one of those important issues that we do grassroots organizing around is having to do with media reform? How can we apply this profound sense of democracy we have toward how the media function in terms of the mainstream media and likewise alternative?
Well, the first thing is I believe that the activism has to start with the regulatory agencies that control media operations. That means going to public hearings when the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, has public meetings where they're taking public comment, write letters to the commissioners when there's changes that appear to be not in the public interest. In the corporate interest, if you can see things moving in that direction, you can affect change by lobbying the commissioners. And that's what you can do on the national level. Now,
and there are organizations that keep you in touch by email. I get these all the time on the FCC issues. There's some, and we'll talk about some organizations that are doing this, but it's possible to do it without having to drive somewhere for a meeting or
that's
start
true.
From scratch.
Yeah,
you can get hooked in, and you can learn through the email and the website.
Yeah, there's letter writing campaigns. There's Reclaim the Media is one of them.
Oh yeah.
That's another good local organization.
Yeah.
And I know that. So that would be on the federal level. I'm not sure what we could do on the state level. We've covered the federal and the local.
Yeah, there's not so much state level thing. I know locally, support Chaos Radio and other independent alternative media. Locally, we have Works in Progress. A newsprint tabloid comes out once a month.
It's a great newspaper.
In-depth articles and lots of announcements and interesting stuff. You don't have to agree with all of it, but let it challenge you.
Yeah, there's lots of organizations here in Olympia that are working on the grassroots level.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to mention a few of them.
We'll mention a few of them. We're running tight on time, but what we'll do is I'll compile a list and we'll post this on the Olympia FOR website, which is www.olyfor.org, and that'll be on at the end of the program in the credits.
Okay.
But there are quite a lot of these things, and there are some national organizations like mediachannel.org does really wonderful stuff. You've already mentioned fairness and accuracy in reporting. We'll show their credit at the end as well. But there are a lot of those. And then there also are all these great email and website-based things like Common Dreams and the Alternet and so forth that every day they'll send you a list of some articles and you can click on the ones that you find interesting. And these are very often outside of the mainstream. You know, you won't see this in Newsweek or you won't see this in your local newspaper, but it's good stuff.
Yeah, there's also Counterpunch.
Yes.
And also locally based indie media sites too.
That's an exciting thing. Indie standing for independent.
Independent,
INDY media, and you can Google indie media and then go to a site and then look at all the ones that are for your city. You know, I mean,
yeah, it's both local and international.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And that has actually grown out of the WTO protests.
Yes, yes.
Grassroots media organizers set up shop right in the middle of the protest.
Yeah, they understood that they were not going to get fair treatment from the mainstream press, so they did it themselves, and it's really, really very good. Let's see. I think we're just real close to running out of time.
This hour has gone by quite quickly.
It goes quickly. It's interesting to look at what people can do even during an election year to resist the temptation to get sucked into that campaign hoopla and continue to work on substantive issues and these infrastructure things that we've talked about, you know, media reform, electoral reform, so that we have fairer processes rather than settle for lesser of two evils in a two-party system that badly needs reforming.
And taking corporate money out of campaigns is a really important thing.
Crucial, yeah. Some of these things are just crucial. That certainly is one, and supporting alternative media is another crucial.
Now, as a counter to that, you're going to find the Republicans say, well, you're going to take corporate media or corporate funding out of campaigns, then you need to take the labor unions' money out of the campaign.
Yeah, it's all the same. I mean, it's the same. It just depends on if you're one brand or another brand. But the idea is the big special interest money has a corrupting influence, and public financing is more profoundly small d democratic. And so, yeah, it pertains even-handedly. And there are, in those states that have used public financing, there are Republicans as well as Democrats and independents using it. So it's not partisan at all.
I'd like to take that one step further and say, real briefly, that the FCC should require commercial broadcasters to give candidates free time.
That's another thing.
There should be a certain amount of free time in addition to the time that they buy or are publicly given.
Okay.
So we are running out of time.
Yes. Give us, if you can do like a closing less than a minute, like a 30-second or a minute thing.
On
closing thought, anything. You know.
Well, if you don't like the media you have or the government you have, then get active and start working for change within your community by joining organizations or doing it independently by writing your congresspeople and getting involved with letter writing campaigns or initiative drives for progressive change. There's lots of things to do. I mean, there's ample information on the internet. It's very easy to Google what you want to know.
Yeah. I hope people also tune into your radio program, which I find just always informative every week. Thursdays at
Yeah.
12 noon on Chaos 89.3 in Olympia. Very good.
This is my 7th year, and this is your 21st year.
Yeah, that's right, on this program, yeah. Well, thanks, Kim.
Thank
People
you, Glenn.
complain about politicians, but complaining doesn't solve problems. Instead, we need to reform how we conduct elections. We need to reform how we handle news media in this country. Politicians and media do not own the power. We, the people, have the power. That's what Thomas Jefferson says, and that's what I believe. We should vote, but don't let the electoral campaigns distract us from real organizing that we can be doing all year round. And so what it comes down to is organizing from the grassroots, cultivating public awareness, shifting public opinion, building grassroots movement that really demand peace and social justice and economic justice and healthy environments and other good social and political changes that we, the people, want, regardless of what the special interests want and regardless of what mainstream media think that we should be wanting. It's also just crucial that we diversify the ownership and the control and the content of the news media, make sure that the news media represent democracy and not special interests. If we do all of this, then we'll end up with electoral victories that will come out as a natural byproduct of good grassroots organizing on issues and good media reforms. All these things will produce the kind of democracy that we want. And also then, regardless of who wins any given election, we will have strengthened democracy and we will have built a foundation for winning victories on our issues. So thanks again to Kim Dobson. Thanks for all the folks who've watched.
Glenn.
For information about a variety of issues relating to peace, social justice, and nonviolence, contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it, and the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.